Hello everybody, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. So, hope everyone's doing well, having a good day. It looks like it's going to be sunny today. I'll be pleased when this snow is gone. Anyways, this coming Saturday is the 54th anniversary of what, if you're roughly my age, you will remember as the fight. It was billed as the fight of the century, but everybody said it was the fight. And of course, I mean none other than Smokin Joe Frazier versus Muhammad Ali. And I thought it would be a suitable time to talk about the career of the great Joe Frazier. Now, when I was growing up, I was a massive Muhammad Ali fan. And the bad guy was Joe Frazier. And, you know, back in those days, we used to talk about Ali as though he was a god. I remember as a little kid, sort of talking with school friends about, you know, who would win, Superman or Muhammad Ali. And most of us said it would be Ali. You know, it just shows what a legendary fighter Ali was. He had transcended sport. He was a worldwide figure. And possibly, maybe Pele was equally famous, but everybody knew Muhammad Ali. Anyways, over the years, of course, I'm still a fan of Muhammad Ali, but Joe Frazier has gone from being the bad guy in my sort of mental image of how these fighters were, to being one of the great fighters of my lifetime. And I thought, let's focus on the career of Smokin Joe as a way of paying our respects to this great fighter on the close to 54th anniversary of his possibly most famous fight. And, you know, just a little career retrospective. As always, in these historical videos, I encourage people to go and do some reading, or look at YouTube videos. Here's a good book, for example, The Golden Age of Heavyweight Boxing. Once There Were Giants. There's also a very good DVD called Champions Forever, which is well worth watching if you can get hold of it. Anyhow, Joe Frazier was one of the most legendary heavyweights in boxing history. He was known for his relentless pressure, a devastating left hook, and of course his battles with Ali and with Foreman. Let's go back to when he was born. He was born on January the 12th, 1944, in a place called Beaufort, South Carolina, which at that time was apparently known as the poverty capital of the USA. They say that, you know, children's bellies were empty of food but full of parasites. People lived in shacks, and I'm talking about African American people, lived in shacks. There was no running water. We're talking of, I mean, the term third world is possibly overused, but very much third world at the time that Joe Frazier was born. He was one of 12 children, and he was, I mean, to say poor is kind of, I don't know, it's not the right word to use really, but desperately impoverished. You will read that he worked on the family farm, which would seem to think that, oh, it's kind of like, you know, a nice bucolic rural setting. Well, no, it was 10 acres that was owned by a white man that Joe Frazier's mum and dad worked as sharecroppers. The land was so poor that the only thing that would grow was cotton and watermelons. You couldn't grow corn or peas or anything else that was sort of common in that geographical part of the world. Well, his childhood didn't get much schooling. He played truant. People didn't really care, and he worked with his dad. His dad had a part of his arm amputated due to an accident with a tractor, so from a very early age, Joe Frazier was working as a farm hand when he was still a child. Now, at some time in the 1950s, his dad had gotten hold of a black and white TV, And Joe Frazier and the community would watch greats like Sugar Ray Robinson and Joe Louis on TV. Apparently his mum used to sell homemade lemonade for, a cent or two, and there would be a community sitting around black and white TV. And one of Joe Frazier's uncles said, "You're going to be the next Joe Louis, you," which kind of inspired him. He also helped his dad run a bootleg liquor operation. His dad seems quite a character for sure. Anyways, by the time he was about 15, he had an altercation with a white man who threatened to take his belt off and give Joe Frazier a beating. In those times, we were clearly talking about, extreme racial prejudice times, right? And Joe Frazier said, "You want to keep your belt on. If you mess with me, it's not going to end well for you." Well, his mom said, "Look, if you can't get on with white people around here, you're going to have to leave." Like, it was clearly, there's no way a black man was going to get an even shake with a white man over a dispute in those times, right? So at about the age of 15, Joe Frazier climbed on the dog's back, as they used to say. In other words, he took the Greyhound bus, and he moved north to Philadelphia in search of, well, a better life, right? And he worked in the slaughterhouse, washing down the blood and the offal and stuff like that. And he would occasionally punch the sides of beef that were hanging up. This was a scene that Sylvester Stallone was aware of, and Sylvester Stallone incorporated it into his movie Rocky. When he was training, he would also run up and down the steps at the Philadelphia courthouse. Again, a scene that Sylvester Stallone incorporated into his movies. He being Joe Frazier, not Sylvester Stallone, got his start in boxing by going to a police athletic club. And he impressed the person that was running it and introduced him to Yank Durham. And that began, of course, a wonderful association until Yank's passing in 1973, I think. So it was in those early days that Joe Frazier was formed, if you like, by Yank Durham, who later brought in Eddie Futch, and we'll get to that in a moment. Now, Frazier rose very quickly through amateur ranks, and in 1962 he won the Golden Gloves, which was a very prestigious tournament. It still is prestigious. He showed a ferocious style of fighting. He would work on the inside, and he had an absolutely iron will. He was sort of like a Jack Dempsey or Marciano type character, in that he wasn't going to be quitting anytime. He entered the Olympic trials in 1964, but he lost a points decision against Buster Mathis. Apparently, he was also hitting Buster Mathis a little low. Buster Mathis had his shorts up high. But he was persuaded to head out to the Tokyo Olympics as an alternate. And of course, Buster Mathis became injured. And so Joe Frazier has his opportunity. Now, Joe Frazier actually bust his thumb during the Olympics. Didn't tell anybody, carried on boxing, and he won the gold medal. He was the only 1964 Olympics boxing gold that the United States won. He turned professional in 1965 under the guidance of Yank Durham and a bunch of business people who formed a thing called the Cloverleigh Group, which included Larry Merchant, who I think at that time wrote for the New York Post, but he became, of course, the voice of HBO. And his aggressive style and a wickedly dangerous left hook really helped him rise through the heavyweight ranks. He beat very tough contenders like Oscar Bonavena, and he also fought and beat Eddie Machen, who one day I must do a video about, another really, really strong contender. In 1966, Yank Durham brought in Eddie Futch. And Eddie Futch, as you may or may not know, if you've seen my video about top trainers, you'll know that Eddie Futch had the key to Muhammad Ali, and Eddie Futch and Joe Frazier stayed together for the remainder of Frazier's career. By 1968, Joe Frazier was considered one of the very best heavyweights. Now, he'd skipped the 1967 eliminators, which were held to determine who was going to replace Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, of course, had refused military service. He'd refused to be inducted into the US military over an acclaimed conscientious objection to the Vietnam War. And so the title was vacant. Frazier was persuaded by Durham and Futch, you skip that elimination. And he did. But of course, he was kind of keeping his powder dry because he was going to take on the winners, and he did. He beat Jimmy Ellis, who he stopped in 1970, to become the undisputed heavyweight champion, and he defended his New York State Athletic Commission heavyweight title by wins over Jerry Quarry and others. But by 1970, he was the undisputed heavyweight champion with this victory over Jimmy Ellis, who had won the Eliminator. Now we get to the really, possibly the most famous thing. 1971, Ali is allowed to return to boxing. His Supreme Court decision hasn't yet been handed down, but he's allowed to return to boxing. And Ali, at this point, because America had moved away from the Vietnam War, public opinion had shifted, Ali had all the liberals, all the Muslims, all the anti-war people, all the civil rights people, who Ali had actually kind of ignored earlier. They were all on Ali's side. And Ali treated Joe Frazier like some sort of Uncle Tom, and mocked Joe Frazier as being representative of the conservative white people. And he engaged in the most gross racial antipathy towards Joe Frazier. He would even, crush his nose up to make his features, sort of resemble those of Joe Frazier. It's the kind of thing that you would have expected, during the Jack Johnson era, and you would not have expected one black person to be so vilify another black person over racial issues. Joe Frazier was several shades darker and had a much, much, much harder upbringing, more representative of the suffering of African Americans than did Muhammad Ali. But Ali sort of behaved towards Joe Frazier in a horrible, disgusting way, quite frankly. And even more so when you consider that while Ali was out of the ring, barred from boxing, Frazier had helped him, even given him money. So it was a real betrayal. Anyways, Ali is back, and Ali has a couple of fights under his belt, and he is ready to challenge Joe Frazier for the undisputed title. And like I say, it was billed as the fight of the century, but pretty much everybody I remember were calling it the fight. Are you going to listen to the fight? Are you going to watch the fight? It was broadcast to over 300 million people by closed circuit television in over 50 countries. So you could go to your local movie theater if it was having the fight, and you paid your entrance fee, and you would sit there and you'd watch on closed circuit TV the fight. A huge amount of celebrities were involved. Archie Moore and Burt Lancaster were commentators. Frank Sinatra was taking pictures. Now, Frazier had actually been diagnosed with high blood pressure before the fight, but he kept all that quiet. He was so determined that he trained himself to a peak that he was never able to get back to, in order to beat, his nemesis Ali, who was treating him so badly. So it was held on March the 8th, 1971 in Madison Square Garden. Ali, I think it's fair to say, everybody who watches that fight will say Ali had lost like a half step of pace, but it was an excellent fight. Frazier relentlessly attacked Ali, attacking him to the body, taking wicked punishment on the way in, but continued to press forward. And in the 15th round, Frazier lands his famous left hook and dumps Ali on his ass in the corner. Now, of course, Ali gets up, but it was a unanimous points victory for Joe Frazier. Arthur McCanty, who was the referee, scored it 8 rounds to 6. One of the judges had it 9 rounds to 6, and the other judge had it 11 rounds to 4. That was Ali's first professional loss, and it solidified Joe Frazier as the best heavyweight in the world. If you've not seen the fight, I absolutely encourage you to see it. There are whole books written just about this fight. So what I've done is I've just given not even the Coles Notes version, I've just barely skimmed the surface, but it's an excellent fight. Now the next Frazier fight, because this is a Frazier story, not an Ali story, the next Frazier fight was to occur on January the 22nd, 1973. And it was against George Foreman, who was the up-and-coming, dominant reincarnation, if you like, of Sonny Liston, who was cleaning out the division. A vicious puncher, big, powerful man with a scowl and just a nasty aura about him, which he kind of learned from Sonny Liston, who was, at previous times, his mentor. So I should make sure I got my notes organized here. So the fight was held in Kingston, Jamaica, and Foreman totally overwhelmed Frazier. He knocked him down 6 times in 2 rounds. And there's a famous call from Howard Cosell, who was, I'm not going to try and impersonate Howard Cosell. I like to think I can, but I'm just not going to make a fool of myself in front of everybody here. But Howard Cosell, famously said, "And down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier." And it became, certainly at the time and for quite a long time afterwards, one of those expressions that everybody used and remembered, a little bit like it formed part of the common vocabulary. And so, I remember being in bars many years later, and if something happened, somebody spilled a drink or something, people would say, "And down goes Frazier." It was one of those things. You had to be there. If you're 25 years old and you're watching this, you think, what is that guy talking about? But anyways, that's a great fight to see. So, and actually, it makes it even more incredible that Ali was able to prevail over Foreman in 1974. I remember actually, being terrified, like wanting to cry, that Foreman was going to kill Muhammad Ali after what he'd done to Frazier. Frazier had beaten Ali, and Foreman comes in and just blows him out. It was a truly shocking thing. Anyways, let's move on with the career of Smokin Joe Frazier. He gets a second fight against Ali on January the 28th, 1974. Now, of course, this is after Frazier had lost his title to George Foreman. So these are 2 former champions, and no belts were on the line. Well, the North American Boxing Association heavyweight title was on the line, but no, it wasn't for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. The rematch, it took place at Madison Square Garden, and Ali boxed more effectively. There was a lot of clinching, and it wasn't a particularly good fight, to be perfectly honest. But Ali prevailed in a unanimous decision. I think it's a fair decision, but it's not the most exciting fight. Ali did box better, a lot of clinching, a lot of holding, and it's, of the trilogy, it's the weakest of the fights. Now, we move to possibly, in my view, anyways, the most exciting of Joe Frazier's fights with Muhammad Ali. And this is commonly called the Thriller in Manila, held in the Philippines, in Manila. And it was swelteringly hot, so like over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And those 2 men, Frazier and Ali, they fought a brutal fight. This is for the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the World, because by now Muhammad Ali has beaten Foreman in 1974 in the Rumble in the Jungle. This is the final fight between Ali and Frazier. It's the best fight I think you can possibly watch as a fan of heavyweight boxing. Frazier was relentless. He attacked. Ali performed, in my view, it was the finest display that Ali put on in total. And Ali said it was the finest. And when he was challenged and said, well, surely your win over Cleveland Williams in '66 was better, Ali said no, Frazier was so much tougher. Well, at the end, as we now know, Eddie Futch threw in the towel in the 14th round. Frazier, who we subsequently found out was blind in one eye anyhow, had his seeing eye closed. Frazier was blind, he couldn't see, essentially. And Eddie Futch threw in the towel. Joe Frazier was madder than hell, but Eddie Futch, to his dying day, said he made the right decision. He wanted to save his fighter from taking even more punishment. What we now know, of course, as well, is that Ali may not have come out for the 15th round either. They had fought themselves to an absolute state where there was nothing left. And this fight, together with other fights that they respectively had, but this fight, I think, took years off their lives, ultimately. You know, to see two human beings go at each other like that it's the finest display of boxing, fighting that you can see, again, in my opinion. If you've not seen it, please go and see it. It's excellent. Unfortunately, of course, it cemented the animus that Frazier had for Ali. Ali had engaged in, again, racial slurs and insults. Famously had a little plastic gorilla, and he was saying, Joe Frazier, ain't he ugly? And he would whack this, the gorilla in the thriller in Manila. And it was, I remember thinking at the time it was funny, but now I look back on it and I think it was entirely unnecessary and not funny. There's selling a fight and then there's going over the top. My view today is it was going over the top. My view at the time is I thought it was great. My hero, Muhammad Ali, was showing this bad man, the baddie, who was boss. Times change, my thinking changes, but it doesn't detract from what went on in the ring. The build-up, I now think of as being unpleasant in the extreme. The fight has matured in my mind and solidified it as being one of the best fights ever. One of the things in that fight that Ali should have been penalised for is he used to hold Frazier behind the neck and hit him, which of course, as we know, is cheating. It's a legal move, but he was not penalised for it. So, anyhow, let's move on with the career of Smokin Joe. Excuse me, please. I've got a bit of a cold here. Frazier did attempt to avenge his loss to Foreman, and it was for the North American Association Heavyweight Championship, not the undisputed, of course. That was held by Muhammad Ali. In 1976, and he suffered another defeat. He stopped Frazier in the 5th round. And that was interesting because Frazier had shaved his head. He'd gone for a total, pool ball kind of look. And he came out, his hood was up, and then he put his hood off, and he was totally bald, and everybody was like, oh, wow. It was at a time when people, didn't commonly shave their heads. Excuse me, please. And it was, I remember watching it thinking, oh, wow, this is, different. But the result wasn't different. It wasn't the complete beatdown that the first fight was, but it was all Foreman all the time. And Joe Frazier retired shortly after that. He did make a comeback in 1981 against Jumbo Cummings, and he went for a draw, I believe, in that fight, and that was in 1981. But effectively, this fight with Foreman was his last real fight, if you like. The comeback was... Interestingly, the comeback actually was about a week before Ali's last fight against Trevor Berbick, the Canadian heavyweight champion, who went on to become a world champion. Who else did Smokin Joe beat? George Foreman. Not an easy man to beat. Jerry Quarry, twice. Both fights were really brutal wars, actually. But Frazier's power just broke down Jerry Quarry. Bob Foster, who was the light heavyweight champion, one of the best light heavyweight champions ever, actually. He was destroyed. I think Frazier's left hook sorted him out, if I remember correctly. Jimmy Ellis, of course, he beat Jimmy Ellis in 1970 to become undisputed. He also beat Joe Bugner. And Joe Bugner is, often overlooked, but Joe Bugner was rated number 4 or 5 in the world for quite some period of time. After retirement, Frazier, ran his own gym in Philadelphia. He trained a lot of young fighters. He also pursued a music career with his band, Joe Frazier and the Knockouts. He was actually not a bad singer. He trained some fighters, and he made a cameo appearance in, I think it was the first Rocky movie. Sadly, Joe Frazier passed away in 2011. In September 2011, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. And by November, on November the 7th, 2011, he passed away at the relatively young age of 67. His death was met with tributes from across the boxing world, including Muhammad Ali, who called him a great champion. In my view, do we underrate or overrate Joe Frazier? I sometimes think that he's somehow lost in the shadow of Ali, even though he beat Ali. First man to hand Ali a loss. I think of Joe Frazier as being one of the top 10 in my lifetime. So that's going back over the last 65 years. I'm not sure where he fits in an all-time top 10, but he's certainly a top 10 in my lifetime. And it really is, I think, on the strength of, he beat as close to a prime Ali as was, likely. Was 1971 Ali as good as 67 Ali? Wasn't as good a dancer, wasn't as fast, but possibly had even more resilience. So it was a great achievement. And if you look at Frazier's other victories, it puts him in that sort of absolute top echelon of fighters. His boxing record is 32 wins, 4 losses and 1 draw. The draw was against Cummings in 81. The losses are 2 against Ali and 2 against Foreman. So, everybody else he fought who was anybody, he managed to prevail over. I think of Joe Frazier as being one of the all-time greats of my lifetime. Be interested to know what you think. Hopefully you've enjoyed this quite long video. It's easy to talk about great champions, and it's easy just to go on and on and on. Please like this video if you have done so. If you are new and you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. And as always, please leave your comments in the comment section below. Most importantly though, go and read up about Joe Frazier if you're not quite so familiar with him, and go and rewatch some of his fights, especially the Thriller in Manila. You'll be doing yourself a favor. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Cheers. Bye-bye.